My earliest memories of playing Pokemon involved me basically steamrolling through the entirety of Pokemon Gold using only my overlevel Typhlosion, armed with Ember, Flame Wheel, Flamethrower, and Fire Blast. Worked out for me back then, but now as an adult I've come to realize how important coverage moves are, so I thought I'd rectify the mistakes of my younger self by banning all stab moves. But playing Pokemon Platinum, since it's the better game. All the rules are in the description, but to summarize, I play using standard hardcore Nuzlocke rules. I can't use items in battle, but held items are fine. I can't overlevel past the next gym leader's highest leveled Pokemon. I can only bring the same number of Pokemon as the gym leader. And I can't use any moves affected by stab. For those who don't know, stab is the acronym for same type attack bonus. As the name suggests, it's a 50% boost for attacks that have the same type as the Pokemon using it. Now, why is this a big deal worthy of being a challenge? Well, lots of Pokemon, especially in earlier generations, have really bad level up learn set coverage. For example, the final stages of the starters in this game only have 4 coverage types each. Take away the stab moves, and they're left with 2. And these moves aren't that strong either. And TMs in this generation are single use only. You don't even get that many pre-Elite 4. This changes up the dynamic more than you'd think. Typically you'd bring Pokemon that have the type advantage over the gym leader, and typically they would be able to take hits, as well as deal super effective damage. But now, not only do you have to pick Pokemon that can take hits, but you also have to hope that they have the coverage to actually deal damage. And more often than not, you'll probably have to pick one over the other. Anyway, enough stalling, let's get started. So what starter should we pick? Now, despite the flaws I listed being shared amongst all the starters, there is one that is significantly worse. And it's sad that you probably already know who that is. Including TMs, Torterra has access to only 7 types, 5 minus the stab moves. That being Normal, Fighting, Dark, Rock, and Steel. And the only Fighting and Steel moves it gets is Rock Smash and Iron Tail. Not quite the best for a Nuzlocke, so naturally we picked Turtwig and Clawless Spoon. Thankfully Turtwig starts off with a normal move so we can do these initial battles without cheating, but the same cannot be said for our first 2 guaranteed encounters, Special the Starly and Rolling Pin the Bidoof from Route 201 and Lake Verity. Bidoof doesn't get a non-stab move until level 13, and Starly doesn't get one at all until it evolves into Staraptor. At the very least, my next guaranteed encounter, Whisk the Shinx, starts with Tackle and then gets Bite at level 13, so we have some other options. I decided that for grinding purposes, I'll allow stab moves against wild Pokemon until there's a legal option available. Past Jubilife, we go on to Route 204, and unlike Diamond and Pearl, there's actually 2 options here, Wurmple and Badoo. Both of these aren't very useful for this challenge, but Wurmple could at least give me some decent coverage moves early on. We get Badoo. It gets some okay early support moves like Leech Seed and Stun Spore, but has almost no offensive coverage. A bit further ahead in the Ravaged Path, we can get either Zubat or Psyduck. With the Platinum encounter changes, it doesn't really matter as these 2 along with Geodude are guaranteed before the first gym. We get Zubat, who I call Mandolin. Crobat's amazing, but as of right now it's only really good for confusion. With that, I've gotten all the encounters I can for this section, and we have our first rival battle against Knife. Definitely my most creative naming scheme so far. Starly goes down to a series of tackles from Spoon while only using growls and a single quick attack. I switch into Mandolin on Chimchar's Leer. Getting hit with Scratch, Mandolin gets off a Supersonic. Next into Whisk as Chimchar hits itself. A few more tackles and with help from Chimchar, Chimchar is taken out. We actually have an encounter here, that being a guaranteed Abra, but I decided to skip it for now. In the Orbra Gate we get Crockpot the Psyduck and then the Mines Crusher the Geodude. And now we have Turtwig and Psyduck, but they can't use their stab moves. And pretty much the only coverage my other Pokemon have are normal moves at the moment. Not the best for a Rock Gym. But luckily we do have something to hit Rock types with. Entering the Orbra Gate, we get given Rock Smash, and like the name suggests, it's good against Rock types. Our saving grace is a 40 base power HM. So I teach this to Spoon, Crockpot, and Crusher, and we're ready to fight Rock. Spoon starts off with a few Rock Smashes while Geodude sets up Stealth Rocks and hits a Rock Throw. Rock uses up his potion and Rock Smash lowers Geodude's defense, then another one takes it down. Onix outspeeds and uses Rock Throw and it does less than Geodude. The first Rock Smash lowers Onix's defense, but the next Rock Throw crits. I switch into Crockpot on Rock Throw. Onix moves first and gets another crit. Sorry for doubting you, Onix. Rock Smash doesn't get the kill. Rock had another potion in the back and gets hit with another Rock Smash. This time Crockpot outspeeds and Onix actually misses a Rock Throw and a final Rock Smash finishes it off. Cranidos is out and has a massive attack stat, especially for a Pokemon in the first gym. I figured Crockpot won't be too useful in this Nuzlocke anyway. I send out Crusher and a few Rock Smashes gets us the final badge. Crockpot's death was probably avoidable, but Psyduck and Golduck's coverage is pretty bad, so I figured keeping my other 2 Pokemon safe was more important. Moving straight onto the Valley Windworks, we have our next big battle. Mars is known to be a bit of a threat, but we have Rock Smash. I start with Rolling Pin using a defense call as Zubat poisons her with Toxic. A roll out later, Perugli's out. Perugly starts off with a fake out, putting a quick end to Rollout's Rampage. I switch into Crusher on a critical scratch. Perugly uses a feint attack, keeping Crusher just out of crit range, and gets hit with Rock Smash, doing about a third. Crusher gets hit with another feint attack, restoring all the damage it took with the Norin Berry. Another Rock Smash activates Perugli's Berry. For a move that has a 50% effect chance, I've gotten like 2 defense drops throughout the entire run. I stay in for another Rock Smash and it gets a defense drop when I need it least. Crusher's now in crit range, so switch into Spoon on feint attack. Spoon tanks a scratch, then ends the battle with a final Rock Smash. I catch Sev the Weasel in the Valley Windworks as it turns out you can't catch Drifloon on the same Friday you finish the segment, and Sponge the Shellos on Route 205. Through Return to Forest, I learn from my past mistakes and take Cheryl's Chansey down as quickly as possible so I can get my encounter, Brush the Wurmple. For Gardenia, I bring Spoon, Whisk, and Mandolin. Gardenia sends out Turtwig, and I send out the bigger Turtwig. The first bite flinches Turtwig, and after the second, Turtwig sets up Reflect. Spoon starts setting up curses as Turtwig uses a Grass Knot, doing more than what I was expecting. Spoon keeps using curses until Turtwig activates her berry and finishes it off with Bite, as Reflect ends. Roserade is already on the field, but the only poison move it has is Poison Sting, so I stay in as Roserade hits Stun Spore. I forgot that grass types were still affected by powder moves this generation. Spoon uses Bite, which despite the boost doesn't get the kill. Roserade uses a Grass Knot, and Spoon was most definitely in crit range. Spoon couldn't move. I switch into Mandolin, and long story short, Gardenia's Pokemon can't touch Golbat. So after many bites and an unnecessary crit later, Roserade goes down. And after a Confuse Ray and many bites later, Cherrim goes down. Yeah, this battle was pretty much always free, especially considering Zubat's guaranteed. I did very much unnecessarily risk Spoon though. Anyway, before moving on, I head to the old chateau and grab Steam and the Ghastly, who has some pretty decent coverage later on, with Gengar having a great special attack. But unfortunately it's not too helpful for our next battle, who's considered to be a run-ender, Jupiter. Jupiter leads with Zubat, and I lead with the bigger Zubat. Bite from Mandolin does over half, and Wing Attack scratches Mandolin. But the next bite gets a low roll, allowing Zubat to get off another Wing Attack. A final bite takes it out. But the real threat is Stuntank. We have no non-ground Pokemon that can learn ground moves, and Stuntank has Stab Night Slash, which has a high crit chance. And in this gen, even a Resist will take a lot of damage. Mandolin outspeeds to hit Confuse Ray, and Stuntank hits itself. I try to see if I can get some flinch hacks, but it doesn't work, and Stuntank hits Smokescreen. I switch into Geodude while Stuntank uses its first Night Slash, and it crits. But then Geodude survives on just 4 HP. I switch into Masher as Stuntank goes for another Night Slash, which doesn't crit this time. Stuntank goes for a Poison Gas this time as Masher uses Seismic Toss, which while a fighting type move isn't affected by Stab. I figure I can stay in and Night Slash misses another crit, activating the Oran Berry. Masher uses another Seismic Toss and activates Stuntank's Citrus Berry. Poison damage brings Masher into crit range, so I switch back into Mandolin and get hit with Night Slash. Mandolin's now in crit range, but as amazing as Crobat is, it isn't too useful for this challenge, so I go for a Confuse Ray, and Stuntank hits itself. I try again with the flinch strats, and it works. Try one more time, but it doesn't work out this time, and Stuntank snaps out of confusion using Night Slash, which doesn't crit. I go for a final Confuse Ray, and Stuntank once again hits itself. A final bite finishes it off. And that's actually probably the best this battle could have gone for me. I only ever needed to risk Mandolin, and I still had 3 healthy Pokemon in the back. I take this moment of breathing space to hatch the egg given to me by Cynthia and call my new precious Togepi Frying Pan. And it's useless. Into the box you go. No Serene Grace was already bad enough, but I also made a huge mistake not soon after. Basically, if you play during the day and make it to Route 210 and have gotten all the guaranteed encounters you could by that point, you can almost get a guaranteed Ponyta with there being a 5% chance you run into Scyther, which isn't bad either. And this means on Route 206 I could get a Gligar who we could evolve into a Gliscor who has an amazing natural moveset, perfect for this run. Even getting all of the elemental Fang moves once you have access to the move tutor. But of course impatiently I walk straight into the grass during night and get the 10% Kricketune, whose best coverage move is Night Slash, at level 42. If I got the more common Ponyta I could have at least gotten a guaranteed Scyther. None of this really matters, but there's not really much that happens between now and the next gym. On to Fantina. I bring Spoon, Rolling Pin, and Mandolin, who I forgot to evolve. Fantina sends out Duskull and I start with Spoon. I've given Spoon a Raw Berry so she can set up a curse, but Duskull goes straight for Future Sight, which is actually worse since there's another crit that I need to worry about. It goes down to Bite a turn later. The Ace Mismagius is out. Mismagius goes straight for a Shadow Ball, revealing that Spoon was in crit range from full health. A +1 Bite doesn't quite manage to get the kill, and Future Sight hits, but it doesn't really do much. The Citrus Berry means Fantina won't heal, so I switch into Rolling Pin, who gets in safely. From there I switch into Mandolin, hoping for Magical Leaf, but get hit with Confuse Ray. I switch back into Rolling Pin to try again, but Psybeam crits. I switch back to Mandolin and Mismagius actually goes for Magical Leaf this time. But of course it moves first, hitting the Confuse Ray anyway. And Mandolin hits itself. Psybeam doesn't crit, and Mandolin snaps out of confusion, hitting Bite, bringing down Mismagius. Should have really evolved Mandolin. Next up is Haunter, who hits itself after Mandolin's Confuse Ray. Mandolin goes for a Bite, leaving Haunter in red, and Haunter finishes the job by hitting itself a second time. Sorry, I said Crobat wouldn't be useful this run. Before moving on, we have a fight with Knife. Whisk absorbs Staravia's Intimidate and I switch into Crusher. Staravia starts right off with the evasion hacks using Double Team. Staravia hits a wing attack, basically wasting a turn, and Crusher's able to hit Rock Smash. We do this one more time, but then Knife switches into Roselia, which takes a Rock Smash, also lowering its defense. I switch into Mandolin on Mega Drain. The next Bite doesn't get the kill, and Mandolin gets paralyzed with Stun Spore. Roselia thinks it has a chance, so it stays in to hit a Mega Drain, and Mandolin is paralyzed, but the next Bite takes Roselia down. Next up is Buizel, so I switch out. But Buizel uses Pursuit. It doesn't do much, and out comes Whisk. 2 bites later, Buizel goes down. Unfortunately, I don't really have much to hit Monferno at this stage, but I do have Sponge, who takes a Leer. Sponge seems to have just been out of crit range of Mach Punch, and Sponge uses Mud Bomb to do just about half, while also lowering Monferno's accuracy. I figure Sponge is my best chance, so I risk the crit, which pays off. Then Mud Bomb misses. I switch into Crusher, and Mach Punch does less than what I thought it would. Another Mach Punch puts Crusher into crit range, and Rock Smash does just about a quarter. I decide the best play is to risk the crit, and Mach Punch misses. Another Rock Smash finishes Monferno off. Staravia's back out, and as we've seen, it can't really do anything to Crusher, so eventually we win the battle. These rival battles seem to be getting harder, and Knife has one of the better rival teams in the franchise as the game goes on. We haven't really got that much to hit Knife's starter, and that's likely not going to change anytime soon. I'm not looking forward to Infernape. On Route 09, Chansey's a guaranteed encounter as I've already got routes, but I usually ban these, and this challenge doesn't really change up the way you'd use the Chansey line. Just thought I'd mention it in case you wonder why I don't use this broken Pokemon. Same for Gyarados. Onwards to Route 215, and there's actually a variety of encounters we can get here. I don't get the 25% Marill with the chance for huge power. I don't get the 15% Scyther who could evolve into a Sizzle with amazing coverage. Instead I get Scoop, the 10% Lickitung. Who's ever used a Lickitung? So now we've made it to Veilstone, and this is actually a pretty big deal. See, we've had pretty bad coverage up until now. In fact, we've basically been relying on 3 different types: Normal, Fighting, and Dark. But now in Veilstone, we have something massive. The Game Corner. Now you may be surprised to hear, but there is a somewhat consistent way to get coins in the Game Corner as long as you have some initial capital. I'll link the video that I watched that has a more in-depth explanation on the mechanics in the description, but to summarize, when you play the slots, there's a chance that a Clefairy will pop up and instantiate a bonus round. During this bonus round, you have 15 turns where if you follow exactly what Clefairy tells you to do and ask no questions, you will always land 3 replays, which not only gives you a guaranteed free spin, but also grants you 15 coins. And you can do this 15 times per bonus round, which basically means a 222 coin profit every bonus round. Using speed up, I land a bonus round every 5 minutes more or less. So assuming I get 220 coins every 5 minutes and the max number of coins you can hold is 50,000, you could in theory max out your coin case every 4 hours. And that's not even including the fact that after a bonus round ends, there's a chance for an encore where you can get another bonus round. And this is a bit more random, so I didn't include it in the calculations, but this happened to me roughly once every 4 bonus rounds, and they can also stack. So why am I giving this long, seemingly pointless explanation? Well, in my opinion, 4 hours is a perfectly reasonable amount of time you can spend grinding. In fact, that's sometimes how long grinds between gems usually take, at least during the late game. And if you haven't watched any of my previous videos, first, you absolutely should. But more importantly, whenever there's a skillless grind involved that can be done in a reasonable time frame, I use this magical tool called PK Hex that turns hours upon hours of boring busy work into 4 minutes of clicking and typing. If you don't know what that is, I'm sure you can Google it. Anyway, the point of my long drawn out explanation and subsequent justification is that from now on I'll have access to unlimited money and coins. And what this means is that our options for coverage moves have now skyrocketed. Well, 5 or 6 useful ones, most of which are special, but still better than the 3 that we've been using. I usually ban this in vanilla games, but with the bad movesets and the one-time use TMs, I figured I'd give myself a pass. We also get citrus berries now. With that, I teach Steamer Psychic, Masher Flamethrower, and Garlic Press the Gardevoir Thunderbolt, and we're ready for Maylene. Meditard goes down to a couple of Psychics from Steamer. Even with the speed drop, Steamer outspeeds to take Machoke down with a single Psychic. Lucario is out, so I switch into Masher on Metal Claw. I stay in and Lucario uses Force Palm. I think I was out of crit range. Masher uses Flamethrower, not even doing half, but it burns. I risk the crit, and it pays off, Flamethrower getting us the 4th badge. I later learned that I had access to Dig at this point. Maybe next time. Well, look at how fast that battle went. Surely this will be the new norm now that we actually have good coverage moves. Right? Well, Maylene's a fighting type gym leader, so I didn't bring it up then, but with her out of the way, and with access to the game corner TMs, there is a type that excels most others. A type that can be anything it wants to be. Many normal type Pokemon, for whatever reason my puny human brain cannot grasp, can learn some amazing coverage moves. In fact, many normal types can learn all of the 90 base power elemental moves. I guess Arceus does pick favorites. And we have one that can take advantage of this gift. Scoop, the Lickitung. And it's ready to evolve as well. I've never used Lickilicky before, but it gets access to all these moves and more. Also having pretty decent stats to boot. Not amazing but not terrible special attack, and pretty good bulk made it so Scoop absolutely steamrolled random trainers, needing no backup. I won't be showing these battles since there's so many, but I thought he deserved a shout out. Knife was really easy this time around as this team hasn't really changed much, but we have access to much better moves. Steamer also has a move for all of his Pokemon. Onto Crash Awake, I bring Scoop, Garlic Press, and Steamer. Gyarados goes down to a single Thunderbolt from Garlic. I switch out to Scoop on Floatzel's Crunch, and then it faints to a couple of Thunderbolts. And back into Garlic on Quagstar's Water Pulse, and it goes down to a single Magical Leaf. I know it must seem that my game corner shenanigans seems to have made this easy for me, but we did have the TM for Shockwave anyway, and trust me, I'll get punished soon enough. In Celestic Town, Cyrus demonstrates his will to end all pointless strife by challenging a 12-year-old to a battle. I start this battle with an injured Scoop who gets hit with Screech, and then uses a Flamethrower to do a lot of damage. Cyrus heals Sneasel up, and Flamethrower does about the same as before, bringing us back to where we were. I switch out to Garlic Press, and he gets hit with a nice punch. I stay in, and Garlic was most definitely in crit range. Thunderbolt ends Sneasel. I switch into Sponge as Murkrow hits a feint attack. Murkrow moves again to hit Drill Peck, and I think I was just outside of crit range. Ice Beam one-shots Murkrow. Golbat's Aircutter barely does anything, and Ice Beam does well over half. But the next one crits, leaving Sponge in red, though the next Ice Beam wins us the battle. On Route 218, I grab played the Mr. Mime, and we have another battle with Knife, but this time it seems pretty scary. Knife leaves with Staraptor, and I send out Garlic Press. Staraptor tries to intimidate my special attacker, and Garlic pulls a No You, and Trace intimidates Staraptor. Staraptor does what it does best and sets up a double team, but Thunderbolt still hits and one-shots. Next up is Heracross, but my Psychic type can't use Psychic moves, so I switch into Steamer. But the Bug type Heracross goes for a Night Slash, and thankfully it doesn't crit. I switch to Sponge on Night Slash. I wasn't in range of a Night Slash crit, but I sure was of a Brick Break 1. Sponge uses Body Slam, me trying to paralyze Heracross, but luckily it doesn't as I realized Heracross might have guts. I switch into Spoon, but Knife reads me and uses Aerial Ace, putting me into a crit range of another. I figure I might as well stay in to preserve HP, and Heracross uses Night Slash, which crits, but doesn't kill. The best move Spoon has to hit Heracross is Cut. My team's taking quite a bit of damage, and not many of my Pokemon can deal with Heracross, so I hard read Aerial Ace and switch to Steamer. I guessed right, and Steamer is left on 5 HP. Psychic finishes Heracross off. I switch to Scoop on Floatzel's Aqua Jet. Floatzel can't do much and goes down to a couple of Thunderbolts. I switch into Garlic as Infernape uses Aerial Ace for some reason. Infernape uses Flame Wheel, and Garlic seems to be out of crit range, and Thunderbolt does just about half. My team's in pretty rough shape, so I figure it's time to bring out Mandolin, and then Flame Wheel burns her. I try going for a Confuse Ray, but Infernape pushes through, and Flame Wheel puts Mandolin in crit range after a burn. I can't risk my team taking even more damage, so I try to go for Flinch Hacks, and it doesn't work out. Flame Wheel brings Mandolin into red, and burn damage barely keeps Mandolin alive. But I need a clean switch, so I use Astonish, Infernape hits itself, and Mandolin is brought down by burn. I bring out Steamer, and Psychic puts an end to Infernape. But Roserai's still in the back, and all but one member of my team are very low. So I stay in to use Psychic to do over half, but then Roseray throws and uses Toxic Spikes. Steamer lives to see another day, and Psychic wins us the battle. And this was my first death since Psyduck, but nice team actually put in work this time. Everyone but Scoop was below half health, and Scoop would have absolutely died to a single fighting move from Infernape. Onto Byron, I bring Masher, Spoon, and Scoop. Byron starts off with Magneton and it goes for Metal Sound. Masher uses Dig, which knocks it out the next turn. With Steelix out, I switch to Scoop as Steelix uses Sandstorm, but the next turn it goes down to a single Surf. These first two were easy, and Byron's Ace Bastiodon can't really do much, but it has one terrifying move, Metal Burst. Metal Burst acts kind of like a weaker counter or Mirror Coat, but works on both physical and special moves. I switch to Spoon as Bastiodon uses Iron Defense. Next I use Rock Smash, which doesn't do much but does lower its defense, and that turn it goes for Metal Burst, not doing much either. I can take another, so Spoon goes for another Rock Smash, once again and getting a defense drop, but Byron wastes a turn using Taunt. Based on the damage Metal Burst did last time, I know it can't kill, so I go for another Rock Smash, and it gets another defense drop. Metal Burst does about what we expected. And one final Rock Smash puts Bastiodon down, getting us the 6th badge. Rock Smash has had so much mileage this run. We have a few battles now with the Galactic Admins, but at this point we have pretty good coverage, so there really isn't much to say. I do almost lose Steamer as it reads my switch using Feigns Attack despite Scoop having been on the field, but it doesn't crit, so a single Psychic does the trick. Pretty easy going so far. But this was the game's intention, to lure me into a false sense of security so I wouldn't expect what's about to hit me. Someone who I wasn't expecting to be a threat. For Candace, I bring Masher, Whisk, Garlic Press, and Scoop. Candace leads with Sneasel and I send out Scoop. Sneasel goes for a slash, not getting a crit, and Flamethrower puts Sneasel in heal range. Candace doesn't heal, instead going for a Feint Attack, which doesn't really do much either. Flamethrower gets an unnecessary crit and Sneasel goes down. Next up is Abomasnow, and this thing's terrifying for one reason, Hail. And then Abomasnow outspeeds to hit a Focus Blast. Now it's terrifying for two reasons, but Scoop being the absolute tank he is, eats it and survives, feasting on his Citrus Berry. A single Flamethrower puts an end to Abomasnow. Abomasnow turned out to be faster than I was expecting, actually having the same speed stat as Empoleon. Now the reason why Abomasnow's Hail is terrifying is because weather setting abilities in this game are permanent, and I didn't bring any weather setters myself. But that's just the start. Out comes Frostless, who not only has Stab Blizzard, which never misses in Hail, but it also has Snow Cloak, which increases its evasiveness in Hail. We're screwed. I switch into Masher, who takes the Blizzard pretty well, but Hail damage isn't helping us. I figure it's better to stay in to preserve HP, and Frostless goes for Psychic, and Masher survives on 5 HP, eating a Citrus Berry. I was at least hoping to lower some Blizzard power points. Flamethrower hits, but doesn't even do half. The next turn, however, Frostless does go for Blizzard, and we say goodbye to Masher. Next up I send Whisk, who actually manages to take a Blizzard with Citrus Berry bringing it out of range of another, and Crunch hits, managing to get the kill. I was worried that Rivalry was going to screw me here, but Whisk pulled through. But with Piloswine out, I need a clean switch, so goodbye Whisk. I send out Scoop, and even Piloswine manages to outspeed, hitting Earthquake. But Scoop shrugs it off and survives on just 10 HP, Flamethrower earning us the 7th badge. 2 deaths, but that battle could have gone a lot worse. I was fully expecting to at least miss one move against Frostless, but the odds were on our side. Those two weren't massive parts of my team, but I do need to find replacements, so head back to Route 10 and grab a shiny stone. Frying Pan may have Hustle, but has a massive special learn pool, and at least those moves aren't affected by Hustle's accuracy drop. Through the Galactic Headquarters, we have another battle with Cyrus. Sneasel starts with an Ice Punch, which Scoop eats, and Flamethrower brings Sneasel into heal range. A heal later, Flamethrower brings us back to where we were. Sneasel goes for a slash and another Flamethrower knocks Sneasel out. Crobat's out and I see no reason to switch out, but despite Poison Fang not doing much, it badly poisons Scoop. Thunderbolt does over half and I figure I can stay in for one more turn, and the Thunderbolt brings Crobat down. With Horchcrow out, I'm not too confident that Scoop can survive another turn, so I switch into Sponge, who takes the Drill Peck. That does over half without a crit. Sponge is probably the bulkiest Pokemon that I have that can take a hit from Horchcrow, so I stay in, and Sponge survives in the red. Ice Beam does over half, but Citrus Berry brings it out of orange. I don't really want Sponge to die yet, so I switch into Steamer, hoping he can take at least one Drill Peck. And Horchcrow goes for Feint Attack, one-shotting Steamer without a crit. Garlic Press is able to outspeed and finishes Horchcrow off with a Thunderbolt. Looking back, Frying Pan was right there. I don't know why I didn't switch into him. He didn't have any super effective attacks, but he could have at least 2-shot. Anyway, Saturn's pretty much a joke, so on to Mount Coronet. Not much to say about Jupiter and Mars. Despite Knife having a pretty good team against them, he's still pretty much useless as always. At least they seem to be targeting him this time around, which is actually the best thing he can do for us. Into the Distortion World, after the Lake Trio helps us cheat a puzzle. Why even include this part? We're straight onto another battle with Cyrus. Flamethrower from Houndoom does about a third, and Scoop Surf does over half. I think I'm just out of crit range, so I stay in for another turn, and Houndoom misses Will-O-Wisp. Another Surf takes Houndoom down. Next up is Hornscrow, and I should have been worried about a crit, but it seems I was just out of range. Scoop hits Thunderbolt to do a bit of damage. I don't know what I was thinking and stay in to take another Draw Peck, which luckily doesn't crit, and another Thunderbolt brings Hornscrow down. Next up is Gyarados, so I switch into Garlic Press to reflect the Intimidate, and Gyarados uses a Waterfall, which absolutely would have killed if it crit. I've been playing far too risky, but I still yet again risk a crit as Gyarados outspeeds to hit Waterfall. It doesn't, so Garlic can one-shot with Thunderbolt. Or not. But it paralyzes, the next one finishing Gyarados off. Next up is Weavile, so I switch into Rolling Pin on the X-Scissor. This time I know a crit would kill, but to be honest, Rolling Pin has mainly been my HM servant, so I risk it, and she survives. But a 4 times effective Rock Smash doesn't even do half. I want to save Switch, so goodbye Rolling Pin. I send out Frying Pan, who survives the Ice Punch and knocks Weavile out with an Aura Sphere. Finally it's Crobat, so I switch into Sponge. Ice Beam does over half, and while it does get poisoned and confused, after hitting itself once, Crobat says / misses, and Sponge snaps out of confusion to use a second Ice Beam, winning us the battle. I risked far too many crits there, but Cyrus's Pokemon can hit quite hard, so I didn't really want to switch around too much to maintain team health. Also, I think at this point I just wanted to get back to the main game as soon as possible. I throw a Pokeball at Giratina as I have no rules against catching legendaries, but since I can't use them, like Arceus before me, I banish Giratina to the darkest depths where I'll never see the light of day again. Box number 2. I think it prefers it this way. Well, we can get back on track now, but first our team needs a bit of an overhaul. Well, at the very least I need a replacement for Rolling Pin. So I grabbed Tinfoil, the Bronzor from Wayward Cave, and a Protector from Iron Island. I use this to evolve Breadbox the Rhyhorn into Rhydon, then Rhyperior, and it becomes a new addition to the team. I also grabbed Microwave the Electabuzz from Route 222. Not much to talk about, straight onto Volkner I bring Scoop, Sponge, Garlic Press, and Breadbox. Also a good time to know that Garlic Press's hidden power type is Ground, and Sponge's is Ghost. Volkner leads with Jolteon and I send out Sponge. Jolteon can't really do much and it even misses its first Iron Tail. After many Ice Beams, Body Slams, and a single heal, Jolteon eventually goes down, while Gastrodon still sits healthy. The Ace Electivire is already out, so I switch into Breadbox, who takes a quick attack of all things. Electivire moves again to use Fire Punch, which crits. Then Breadbox uses Poison Jab, which also crits. However, the next Fire Punch burns Breadbox, so Poison Jab does less damage. But then it poisons. And there's no reason to switch out, so as Fire Punch does nothing. Poison Jab takes Electivire down. And next up it's Raichu, so I switch into Garlic, who takes a Focus Blast. Based on the damage Focus Blast did, I stay on Signal Beam and Garlic gets off a Calm Mind. I don't want to risk a crit, so after another Signal Beam, Garlic uses Hidden Power to not kill. Should have gone for Calm Mind. Volkner had another full restore in the back, and this time Hidden Power gets a higher roll that still misses the kill. The Signal Beam doesn't crit, and Hidden Power finally knocks Raichu out. Finally it's Luxray, and I switch into Scoop, who takes a Crunch, not doing much, but lowering Scoop's defense. So I switch into Sponge on Thunderfang. Crunch reveals that Sponge was in crit range and Body Slam barely does anything. I decide to risk one more crit and Body Slam finally gets a paralysis. Back into Scoop and Luxray's paralyzed. 2 more surfs and we get the final badge. A pretty straightforward fight, but I think a break's important before the Elite Four. Well, it doesn't last long as we immediately have our final showdown with Knife, and his team is actually really strong for being a battle before the Elite Four. Barry leads with Staraptor and immediately starts off with a close combat, which doesn't manage to crit Scoop. With the lower defenses, a single Thunderbolt takes it down. Next up is Heracross, so I switch out to Frying Pan on close combat, which doesn't crit. Frying Pan outspeeds, and with the defense drop, one-shots Heracross with Psychic. I switch back into Scoop on Floatzel's Ice Fang, doing pitiful damage, but Floatzel also had Brick Break, which luckily also misses the crit. And then Scoop asserts his dominance by getting a critical Thunderbolt, one-shotting Floatzel. Next up is the terrifying Infernape, so I switch out to Garlic Press, who dodges a Focus Blast. Turns out Infernape had Shadow Claw, but my luck's been working overtime as we dodge yet another crit. Hidden Power does just over half. I get a free switch into Frying Pan, Focus Blast doesn't get a crit, and Psychic finishes Infernape off. I send out Breadbox on Snorlax's Body Slam. Breadbox's Hammer Arm does well over half, and Earthquake from Snorlax pales in comparison. Snorlax now outspeeds to use Rest, and from there we get a free kill after 2 more Hammer Arms. Finally it's Roserade, so I switch into Spoon on Giga Drain. Roserade misses the crit from Giga Drain and Crunch does over half. It also lowers Roserade's defense. I stay in for 1 more, but Knife finally gets his long-awaited crit, bringing down our starter, Spoon. I send out Frying Pan and then outspeeds using Psychic to win us our final battle against Knife. I'm being a bit more carefree around crits, but truth is I already have a pretty good idea on who I want to bring to the Elite Four. And at this point we have some pretty good replacements for those who couldn't make it. Spoon being our only death is actually a pretty good outcome. But before any of that, we have some preparing to do. For the Pokemon League, I set the level cap to be the average of all of the Elite Fours, including the champions, aces rounded down. In this case, it'll be level 57. The level cap is lifted once I start the battle. First, I need a replacement for Spoon. Out of my reserves, evolving Microwave into an Electivire would provide me with the most coverage options, while also giving me a new type on the team. It also has Most Drive, which can absorb electric moves, giving it a speed boost. Also, while Garlic Press has put in a lot of work this run, I figure it's time to give him a well-deserved retirement, and switch him out for Tinfoil, now a Bronzong. It too has a Psychic type, but also comes with Steel, which gives our team some much-needed resists. While rounding off my team's movesets, I had a big brain plan involving Frying Pan and Encore, so I went to the move relearner, and it was that moment I realized that you couldn't reteach Pokemon moves that they only learned during their previous evolution. Worse yet, I did teach Frying Pan Aura Sphere, so I should have noticed back then, but I still taught a move over Encore anyway. I also learned that Togekiss gets no setup moves this gen, so instead I taught it Silverwind. With that, my final team is Frying Pan the Togekiss, Microwave the Electivire, Sponge the Gastrodon, Breadbox the Rhyperior, Tinfoil the Bronzong, and finally Scoop the Lickilicky. Like the gym leaders, I'll be using the same number of Pokemon as the Elite Four members, so for each battle I'll bench one Pokemon. For Aaron, I bench Tinfoil. Aaron leads with Yanmega and I lead with Frying Pan. Frying Pan outspeeds and Flamethrower takes Yanmega out in one hit. Next up's Drapion, so I switch into Microwave on Ice Fang. Drapion somehow outspeeds and uses Cross Poison, not getting the poison, and activates Citrus Berry. Microwave's Earthquake does over half, but Citrus Berry brings Drapion back into green. I switch into Breadbox, who eats the Cross Poison. Next it goes for a super effective Ice Fang, doing nothing, and Hammer Arm brings Drapion into heal range. After the heal, we repeat this exchange 2 more times, and then I realize Avalanche would have done more with better accuracy on the final turn. Next up is Sizzle, so I switch into Sponge on the Iron Head. And then I kinda forgot about the bench as I switch into Tinfoil trying to get everyone's level up. But when I switch into Scoop, Sizzle uses the same move, so it's like I never messed up. Iron Head doesn't flinch and Flamethrower melts Sizzle. Heracross comes out and this was a terrible time to realize I have no fighting resists. Bit of an oversight. I send out Frying Pan on close combat, which doesn't crit. Frying Pan outspeeds to one-shot Heracross with Psychic thanks to the defense drop. Finally it's Vespiquen, and after a Flamethrower, a heal, and then a few more Flamethrowers, we beat the first Elite Four member. No losses, but I did have to risk a couple of crits. How did I forget a fighting resist? I think I was still under the impression that I had Garlic Press. For Bertha, I bench Breadbox. Bertha leads with Whiscash, who outspeeds to hit Tinfoil with Aqua Tail, which also gets a crit first turn. After eating its berry, Tinfoil uses Grass Knot, which also crits, knocking Whiscash out in one hit. I switch out to Sponge on Gliscor's Fire Fang, and then after an Earthquake, it goes down to a single Ice Beam. I switch out to Frying Pan expecting a ground move, but hit Powdon uses Yawn instead. I switch out to Scoop on Stone Edge. Scoop outspeeds to hit Surf, doing over half, and Scoop shrugs off an Earthquake. Another Surf takes Hippowdon down. Next is Golem and it goes down to a Surf. And finally we're on Rhyperior, and with Solid Rock and the Sandstorm buff, I'm not confident the Surf kills. So I get a free switch to Tinfoil as Rhyperior uses Earthquake. Rhyperior outspeeds to use Mega Horn that does way more than I was expecting, and Tinfoil uses Grass Knot, which actually manages to one-shot. And that's Bertha. Definitely one of the easier ones, but I did almost lose Tinfoil to a Mega Horn crit. But next up is Flint, and his team is actually pretty strong in this game. Ironically, I bench Breadbox against the Fire Elite Four member. Flint sends out Houndoom and I send out Bronzong. This may seem stupid, because it is, but from experience, Houndoom usually goes for a sunny day, and I think Flamethrower needs to crit to kill, so Flint may not see a kill. As expected, Houndoom uses Sunny Day and Tinfoil uses Stealth Rocks. I switch into Sponge as it soaks up a Flamethrower, but then gets burned. I think I'm just outside of crit range, so I stay in and Dark Pulse brings Sponge low. Sponge uses Body Slam, and it paralyzes. And this lets me bring Frying Pan in early, on top of which Houndoom can't move. And Aura Sphere ends Houndoom. We're already on Infernape and this is the Pokemon I'm terrified of. We have one Fire Resist, and no fighting ones. Luckily Sun's ended, so I stay in, and Flare Blitz was not in crit range. With the chip damage from Stealth Rocks and recall damage, one Psychic is all I need. Next up is Magmortar, and we've basically won the battle. I know Thunderbolt's coming out, so I switch into Electivire, who can absorb it with Motor Drive, and also gets a speed boost. An Earthquake ends Magmortar. Earthquake ends Flareon. And Earthquake ends Rapidash with help from Stealth Rock's damage earlier, and getting us to the final Elite Four member. Honestly, the only Pokemon I was worried about was Infernape, and once I saw Flare Blitz was out of crit range, I knew the battle was won. I think the only risk I took was setting up Stealth Rocks with Tinfoil. Had Body Slam not paralyzed Houndoom, I would have had Scoop take it out, but that would have meant that Frying Pan would have had to take another hit from Infernape. Onto Lucian, I bench Sponge. Lucian leads with a screen setting Mr. Mime and I send out Breadbox. Mr. Mime starts off with Reflect, which was the worst one out of the two for me, but Breadbox hits Mega Horn, still managing to knock Mr. Mime out in one hit. Next up is Bronzong, and since Reflect's up, I send out Scoop, who eats a Psychic. Scoop outspeeds using Flamethrower, but then Bronzong goes for Calm Mind, which I was kinda worried about. Flamethrower won't kill from here, so I go for an Ice Beam to keep Bronzong out of heal range, and Bronzong's Psychic does a lot. One more Flamethrower and Bronzong goes down. I don't think that crit mattered. Reflect fades away and Gallade comes out. And this is probably Lucian's most threatening Pokemon. I send out Togekiss, who takes a Drain Punch, and then I switch into Breadbox, who takes a Stone Edge. And Gallade has Leaf Blade, but with Rhyperior's defense and Solid Rock ability, I'm fairly confident it can survive, at least without a crit. And Breadbox uses Shadow Claw, and it crits, taking Gallade out in one hit. The next play would have been to switch into Tinfoil, but this works too. Next up is Alakazam, so I switch into Microwave, who was absolutely in range of a Focus Blast crit. But this lets me bait Psychic to safely bring in Tinfoil. Alakazam's Focus Blast misses and Payback one-shot. I actually didn't know that it still got a boost if the opponent missed. And finally it's Espeon. Shadow Ball does quite a bit of damage, and another Payback doesn't kill. Lucian heals Espeon back up, so Tinfoil uses Payback again, and it turns out it still gets the boost even if the opponent heals. I'm actually still learning mechanics. Well, like before, it doesn't kill. Alright, just one more Payback. Oh. Shadow Ball crits and we say goodbye to Tinfoil. I send out Frying Pan, who was in crit range of Psychic, and Shadow Ball finishes Espeon off. And that death was entirely avoidable. I could have gotten a free switch into either Frying Pan or Scoop any time, and one move from Espeon would have likely not killed. But despite our loss, we have made it to the champion. Cynthia leads with Spiritomb and I lead with Frying Pan. Spiritomb's bulky, but it can't really do much to Frying Pan, being the main reason I wanted Encore, but I decided to go for a Silver Wind anyway. And we get a turn 1 Omni boost. Spiritomb goes for a Dark Pulse, barely doing anything. I figure I can go for another Silver Wind, and we get another Omni boost, back to back. Remember, Frying Pan doesn't have Serene Grace, so this was a 1% chance. Dark Pulse does even less. The last Silver Wind doesn't get a boost, but it does take Spiritomb out. Next up is Cynthia's own Togekiss, and Frying Pan can move first, using Flamethrower to do just about half. Shockwave scratches Frying Pan. The next turn I go for a Psychic, forgetting that Flamethrower was actually stronger in this generation, and Togekiss survives on a sliver of health. Shockwave doesn't crit, activating Frying Pan's Berry. Cynthia heals, and a few more Psychics later, Togekiss goes down. The last one was a very unneeded crit. And next up is Lucario, and thanks to the Omni boost, Frying Pan's able to outspeed and one-shots Lucario with Flamethrower. With Milotic out, I'm able to get a free switch into Sponge as Milotic uses Mirror Coat. Sponge hits a Toxic, while Milotic still tries for a Mirror Coat. I spend the next few turns stalling using Protect and Recover, but once Milotic's brought below half, Milotic uses Surf while I go for an Ice Beam. This ensures that poison damage finishes Milotic off without a chance of it getting healed. I switch out to Frying Pan on Roserade's Energy Ball, and the next turn he gets outsped to get hit with Sludge Bomb, and we say goodbye to Frying Pan. I don't think the crit mattered. I send out Microwave and Roserade uses another Sludge Bomb. This time it doesn't crit, but poisons. Fire Punch just misses the kill. I'm ready to sack Microwave, but then suddenly Cynthia switches out to Garchomp for whatever reason. Fire Punch can't really do much to Garchomp. I figured that it's still time to sack, so Flamethrower later, we say goodbye to Microwave. I send out Breadbox, and if there's one turn I really don't want to see a crit, it's now. And Garchomp uses Earthquake, and it doesn't crit, and a boosted Avalanche knocks Garchomp out in one hit. Roserade's back and gives Breadbox an honorable rest by using Energy Ball. I bring out Scoop, my ace, and after dodging a Toxic, Scoop uses a Flamethrower, putting an end to Roserade and the Nuzlocke. And that was possibly one of my luckiest champion fights. Silverwind was just me using it for the sake of it, and I got not one, but 2 boosts. The boosts weren't exactly necessary, but did make the battle a whole lot easier, and made it so that I wouldn't have to rely on dodging more crits. And the big one being that I could outspeed Lucario. For Togekiss, I would have just baited Shockwave into Microwave's Motor Drive and then used Rock Slides. While this wasn't the most difficult challenge I've done, I think it has a lot of potential as it really does change up the way you decide which Pokemon to bring, and how you play needing to have resists while also being able to hit the opponent. Though I think this would be better in a game that has unlimited TM uses. Also, the naming theme was things that you can find in the kitchen that are hard to stab with. Thanks for watching, and I hope you stick around for a future video.